Okay, so before we get into all of our September stuff, I figured we'd go ahead and end the month on a couple of videos with new releases, new-ish releases. In this instance, of new releases, anything that came out this year. So that's what the next two videos are going to be before we go into all the September stuff. We're going to start with Fast X, or Fast 10, whatever you're calling it. And I feel like I've made my opinion on these movies pretty clear multiple times over. I was actually quite a big fan of these movies up until the eighth one. The seventh one I feel like was the last really good one, and the seventh one actually might be my favorite one if it's not the first movie. And then once they hit 8, 9, and this, and Hobbs and Shaw, they are... And I know people have been embracing them for the cartoons that they are now, and the borderline superhero movies that they are now. That charm went away a really, really long time ago, and it just feels like... The thing I've been saying since the 8th movie is that they're just doing it for the memes now. And that's, like, they already went to space, they're embracing the family thing. We have Alan Richson's character here who's basically trying to be the audience, trying to pander. So, trying to pander by talking down to the movie and what it's doing, I don't know. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And this is... yeah. And as far as talking about the movies that are more beloved in the franchise, I think the makers learned that a lot of people will probably say their favorite in the franchise is Fast Five. At least that's what I hear a lot. So of course that's where this movie is going to be rooted. It are the events of Fast Five, and we're going to have Jason Momoa, our new villain, be the son of Joaquin de Almeida's character from Fast Five, the villain in Fast Five. And we're gonna go from there, and it's gonna be this whole revenge plot. And we're gonna tie Jason Momoa into scenes from Fast Five for the opening scene, and it's gonna be like, okay, that's actually not a bad idea. Especially if you're kind of trying to set the tone of, well, we know we've gotten out of hand and we're doing it for the memes now, but let's kind of come back to when people actually genuinely liked the movies and not just, ironically. So that's where we start, but then we reintroduce the characters, and that's another thing is, depending on how you feel about the characters is going to determine how you feel about these movies, probably. In a big sense, anyway. Not maybe everything, but, like, the whole family aspect and everybody being really close, the cast being really close, even though that's kind of gone up and down in the past few years, but we still have Dom walking around being a walking motivational poster and just saying, shit that's supposed to sound wise or whatever. Though he's getting very contradictory at this point. There's a point in time where he says, people these days, no one listens. And then, like, in the same breath, he says, each generation's better than the last. And it's like, okay, do people not listen now, or are people getting better? I don't... fuck off, Dom. You're not... And you can sense Vin Diesel's like own arrogance kind of coming through in the character the more and more we go, and it's starting to get embarrassing. And the banter, particularly between Ludacris and Tyrese and stuff like that, stuff that was really funny back in the day, is just the same tired shit on a loop at this point. We're even recycling lines like, I want to say it was Tyrese might have done the fake sneeze and then said, I'm allergic to bullshit, which I don't know if that predates iRobot, but it's certainly been since iRobot that line has existed. So everything about it feels really stale and old. There's even the bedroom dialogue, like where we get these long scenes, these scenes that feel very long, where Dom and Letty are just kind of talking in the bedroom. And I feel like we've had a million Dom talking to a woman in the bedroom, whether it be Letty or was it Elsa Pataky that was the one that got killed, I think. And these scenes all feel the same. Like, they all feel like the same dialogue, the same setting up the characters, the same everything. So, everything is just really on neutral here for a while. And then the villain comes in, Jason Momoa, and one of the things we'll talk about Jason Momoa specifically in a second, but something that has been driving me insane for these movies is the stuff that people talk about, but they're like, oh, but it's supposed to be silly. Oh, it's why I like the movies because they don't take themselves too seriously. There's a lot of things about these movies that are just getting really annoying the more they do it. One of which is the fact that no characters stay dead. Like when I went into Fast 9, I remember thinking, I'll bet they're gonna bring Han back from the dead, and I'll bet John Cena's gonna be a good guy. And I'm not saying that in this bragging sort of way because I feel like anybody with fucking eyes would have seen that a year before the movie came out. So that's when you talk about not only bad characters don't stay bad, dead characters don't stay dead. These movies, they're taking the family aspect to the extreme, and they're not just making movies, about family, as they say, but they're just making family movies at this point. You could slap a Disney logo on these things at this point. But that's where we are at this point. So when I'm talking about Jason Momoa coming into the story and the fact that no characters die, there's no stakes whatsoever. Jason Momoa's motto throughout the movie, his vengeance motto is never accept death when suffering is owed. So the villain is now stating a rule to prevent deaths of main characters. So so what the fuck are we doing here? I don't know. But talking about villain characters also, I've been joking since the 8th movie, where it was like, yeah, Charlize killed Dom's other wife or girlfriend or whatever, the mother of his baby, by shooting her at point blank range right in front of him. But it's like, and she's blown up whatever, she's killed however many people. But I said, I'm counting the days Charlize is at the fucking barbecue. I'm just, like, it's going to come. If fucking Deckard Shaw is a good guy now, after he was such an amazing villain in the 7th movie, even I think even the whole Shaw family are good guys now. Owen, the mom, everybody. Helen Mirren's still playing the mom, as if she doesn't have better things to do. But I know she wanted to be in these movies, but still, it's depressing. But yeah, so Charlize now comes in, and she rings the doorbell, and Dom answers, and Dom and Letty let her in. And Charlize says, yep, I'm as surprised as you. And it's like, Charlize, I'm not fucking surprised at all. You're... and they set up like, oh, she's come here to bleed to death. She's going to give some information and then she's going to die. And it's like, nope, I actually don't think that's going to happen at all. I think we're going to bring Charlize in, we're going to embrace her, and she's going to be working with the good guys. And sure enough, she and Letty basically have this new Hobbs and Shaw thing going on for the rest of the movie. And it's... And I know it sounds like I'm asking too much for these movies to not be this blatantly predictable because it's the Fast and Furious movies, like, who gives a fuck? But I just don't understand what the fucking point is. We got all the way... Too Fast, Too Furious is not a movie I'm extremely fond of or anything, but other than that, we got to 7 movies before this got stale. That's a lot of movies like this. That's a lot of Fast and Furious movies before it finally started to get stale, to me anyway. And I was willing to embrace the stuff as it came because there were some surprisingly great elements in a lot of them. Like I said, particularly the 7th movie and the way James Wan handled it and the way the villains were handled. How we had 2 villains at once with, Jason Statham and Jaimin. And it just they stuffed a lot of characters into 7, and it still really worked. And like I said, a lot of people will sing such high praises of 5, which I do like, but not as much as I love the 7th one or the first one. But that's a long way to go, and now I can't find any charm left. Like, they've just really wrong. And like I said, I understand if it sounds like, I'm expecting too much from these, but like I said, that's a long way to go to actually still be of some kind of quality. And so, yeah, I feel like now it does feel like a genuine criticism to say they've been really wringing it dry for like the last four movies now, if you count Hobbs and Shaw. So, like I was talking about, as far as it getting self-aware, now that we've gotten to that point, also, um, we have first of all we have Brie Larson come in, who is nobody's daughter, and there's really no explanation for why Kurt Russell's not in this when pretty much every fucking buddy else is in it, in one way or another. So I don't know if Kurt Russell just got sick of this shit too, or if he was busy with something else or what. But now we have Brie Larson because we can't get Kurt Russell. And Alan Ritchie's here, who's kind of in charge now, and he does this whole thing where he runs down. He basically recaps the whole franchise. And like I said, in a very pandering way, like he's speaking like an internet comment section, essentially. And then he makes the self-deprecating joke of, I don't care about hearts of gold and I hate barbecues. And it's like, I feel like as somebody that's starting to really dislike the franchise, or has for the last, oh god, I guess it's been 6 years since Fate came out, so that's a long time to be hating this franchise, that I should enjoy comments like that. But like I said, it just feels like such obvious pandering that it's just as pandering as Dom saying family, or, Tej and Roman doing their tired banter or whatever, and it's, Tyrese screaming or whatever, running away from something like a cartoon character, whatever it is that they're doing. But something else that's really been bugging me about these movies is how the way they've been embracing the action getting more and more over the top. And I had heard, like rumors that this one was going to try to come back to more of a racing angle and kind of be more grounded. Now that they've done the space thing, it's like, alright, let's back it up now. But the action is way too fake and CGI heavy still. It feels like there's a lot of green screen going on. When there's something that actually looks like, in these rare instances where it actually looks like a real stunt is being performed, they still cut the scene to shit. Because there's this moment where, like, I think it's Letty, like, jumps her car during one of those first, it's like the boulder chase or whatever it is. And Letty's car does this jump that looks real, but we get like 3 different cuts of this. Like, we cut away from the car in mid-jump, to where if they actually did jump this car, we're not even showing the real stunt. That's how hung up they are on everything in this movie action-wise looking as fake as possible. And that's, given the kinds of movies these are, that's a real bummer. Like, it's one thing where it's like, say what you will about the characters or the story or whatever, but if this movie just had, like, awesome stunts and chase scenes that feel actually like they were really done and practically done, there would still easily be something of quality here. But like I said, everything just has to be so fucking over the top now. Even though it does feel like they're toning it down a little bit from 9, it doesn't feel by much. Like, it still feels like we're in this vein of, oh, we're in a completely alternate reality, and the action scenes in this are going to reflect that. And there's just nothing entertaining about it. The action scenes are just blurs. And even stuff also that might look real, it's also just, I don't know if it's, the way things are digitally done now and digitally shot or whatever, but it also looks too polished. So, like, when something big happens in an action scene, even if it's not an effect, it still looks animated. And it all looks like shit. And it goes on and on and on. And these were fun at one point. I long for the days of Paul Walker jumping from a car into a bus and fighting Tony Jaa. Remember that? That was only a few movies ago. And we're just not in that. The cars parachuting out of a plane feels so not over the top now. And it's like the other movies are only getting better the worse these get. I guess that's good, at least. Like, it's not tainting them. It's just like, if you decided that the franchise stopped at a particular place, you're much better off, because they are not really getting any better. This one's probably a little better than... Well, no, I take that back, because I still think of the ones since 7, if you take out Hobbs and Shaw, Fate is probably still the worst one. So maybe they're getting slightly... I guess maybe they're getting slightly better, actually, as they go. I'll have to completely retract what I just said. But Hobbs and Shaw is still like the bottom of the barrel of the whole franchise, I think. Even worse than Fate or Too Fast, Too Furious. Too Fast, Too Furious, though, is looking like a painting at this point. But, yeah, so there is... Jason Statham's in the movie, which I almost forgot, because the action in this wears you down so much and gets so boring and so repetitive and so fake that by the time Jason Statham shows up in the movie and another action scene breaks out, I'm so fucking checked out at this point. It's... and, like, when Jason Statham, who I thought was a high point of 7, and it was such a... this great big deal when he showed up at the end of 6, and it's like, oh, shit. Like, bringing Jason Statham into this series is gonna be fucking awesome. And it was for a little bit. And then Hobbs and Shaw happened, and Fate happened, and Deckard Shaw became a good guy, and it just all went to shit. So now Jason Statham shows up in a Fast and Furious movie, and I barely register it because I just don't. I just don't care anymore, I guess. But I'll tell you what I do care about. So if there's one redeeming factor to this movie, and there is one, talking about how this movie is the same tired shit, and just over and over and over again, it's so prolonged, and it's the same shitty action that feels like it goes on forever. This franchise, and this movie specifically, desperately needed something to shake it up, do something totally different, something totally out of left field, and that comes in the form of Jason Momoa as the villain. Because the way they set up the villain's motive is very obvious. And, it's like, it's a revenge story. Okay, whatever. But this character, and Momoa's willingness to go all out, where when I heard that Jason Momoa was cast as the villain in this, my first thought was, well, when's he joining the barbecue? Probably shortly after Charlize goes good, which is going to be happening any time now. But I don't know. I feel like this villain's here to be a villain, and you can't turn a villain like this around. This guy is too fucking crazy. It's like, there's villains that are crazy enough where even the Fast and Furious franchise could never make them good guys, as hard as they tried. Like, you can make Deckard Shaw a good guy, which I would have never seen coming after Furious 7, but this guy is so, like I said, such an injection of whatever the hell this franchise needed to boost it back to life and give it a what the fuck nature it doesn't feel forced. Because it feels like when they went to space in 9, they're just following memes and they're saying, like, oh, what's the over-the-top stuff the fans are saying? Let's just do that thing because we're lazy fucking bullshit artists. And it's gonna work because of people. So, this doesn't feel like somebody said, let's make this villain as weird and crazy and unpredictable as possible and just see how crazy we can make him. It feels like Jason Momoa walked onto the set and did whatever the fuck he wanted. And nobody had control of him. And, like I said, that's exactly what this needed. And so, like, I would have never suspected we were going to get Dom racing the main villain. He races the main villain in this movie. We finally get another thing like this. And Jason Momoa shows up to this race basically dressed like Princess Jasmine. And it's like, well, that's kind of fucking amazing because I did not see that coming. There is one scene where there's one scene in this movie with Jason Momoa that made me genuinely say, like, what in the fuck is this scene? And it's like, it really shows the psychotic state that this character's in. But like I said, if this were any other movie or any other character, I'd say they were trying too hard to make him seem over-the-top crazy. But when this series is desperately in need of a character like this, I am all in on whatever the fuck Jason Momoa is doing here, and any what the fuck nature he can bring to it. It's such a breath of fresh air. I love it, and he brings this movie up to a level that it does not deserve. So he keeps it from being almost, bottom of the barrel of the franchise. So obviously we do get, returning characters like Cena's back, and of course he's a good guy. He's not just a good guy. Oh, he's singing in the car. He's saving kids. He's doing everything that a villain from a previous movie does not do, because that's what this franchise is, and it's this endless loop of that. And some other characters are going to predictably come back. One character in particular is like, well, there's one character they haven't brought back from the dead yet. Let's count the minutes, and I regret to inform you, it is not Johnny Tran. So it's there's another character where it's like, yep, any day now they're going to bring this character back from the dead, and right on cue, there they are. And let me tell you, I will bet when they come back for the next movie, they aren't going to bring an ounce of personality with them, so it doesn't fucking matter that they came back anyway. I guess there is the one returning character where I wasn't sure it was going to happen, and they may be able to pull a Momoa where they might be able to bring some energy, some much needed energy to the next movie, but I won't hold my breath or anything, but I'm hopeful a little bit with this person coming back. So with that and Momoa going on, we'll see what happens. But yeah, before we get to the ending, I will say there was another aspect of this movie that made me feel incredibly betrayed. And that is, I've been listening seemingly nonstop for the longest time to endless nonstop hate for Pete Davidson. And I've been sitting on the sidelines. I've been watching, like Bodies, 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 and Big Time Adolescence, and King of Staten Island, and I've liked Pete Davidson since The Roasts. I think he's really when he was on Saturday Night Live, I thought he was really funny. So I've been sitting here defending Pete Davidson for as long as I can, as much as I can. And then for some reason he waltzes into this movie and has one scene that might be one of the worst scenes in the movie, and that's saying something. That's a very low bar for this movie. And it's like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, what the fuck, dude? I've been defending you this whole time. And then this scene happens, and it's like, I can't fucking defend this. If people are going to come to this movie going, oh man, I hate Pete Davidson, and then, oh, there he is, and they're going to say, oh god, I can't be there to say, oh, you're blowing it out of proportion. Give Pete Davidson a chance. This scene is unsalvageable. I don't know what the fuck this scene is. So that's a bummer. That hurt. So let's go ahead and skip to the end, where we were talking about how the movies have basically taken on, everybody's been saying the movies have taken on the persona of superhero movies at this point, because of how over the top they are and how invincible the characters are, and how they just fucking refuse to die. So, and even the movies are starting to embrace that, which is only making it worse, not better. I know, that used to be a thing. Embracing your shit side ended up making you better, and oh, you're self-aware now. No, it's only, the more self-deprecating this franchise gets, I feel like the worse it's getting, which is usually the reverse. But talking about it being akin to superhero movies, I do remember when Fate of the Furious came out, and they were kind of setting up this sort of Dom versus Hobbs thing, and it was like, right on the coattails of Captain America Civil War coming out. And so it was like, oh, you're pitting your characters against each other. Oh, that sounds familiar. But now they're like 4 years late, but now they want to be Infinity War, I guess, where the thing is, we set up, I'm assuming I'm not spoiling anything here, the movie's been out for a while, we're at the end of the review, and I said that we're going to be talking about the ending. So this movie actually wants us to believe that all the characters are either dead or about to die. Where it looks like Tej and Roman and Natalie Emmanuel and whoever else, Jordana Brewster might have also been on that plane. That plane looks like it might be crashing. John Cena looks like he's made some big explosive sacrifice of his own life. And now it looks like Jason Momoa is going to blow up Dom and his kid. and then the movie is over. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to bet that, with the exception of maybe Jason Momoa, all of these people are both in the next movie and survive the next movie. That's. I'm just gonna say that now. I don't think any of these main characters are dead. So, and I'm not alone in that. I'm sure anybody, if you're not a fucking idiot, I'm sure you don't believe any of these characters are actually dead, and that you don't believe there's any actual stakes here. Um, there's there's one character they might kill. That's one of those returning characters we were talking about, but I really don't see that happening. I think everybody's going to stay invincible. There is no reason this is a cliffhanger because we all are going to know the inevitable outcome. So this is all just a waste of fucking time to make this 2 movies. So I can already see all the backpedaling of what we saw in this last scene, or what it looked like we saw in this last scene. So that's just, like I said, that's just wasting people's time trying to build this up like there's actual stakes and like the characters are actually in danger. I'll fucking believe it when I see it. So the second movie we're going to talk about is completely different. We're going to go to Asteroid City. And this went to Cannes, I believe, and I started getting really hyped for it because the French Dispatch came out a couple years ago, and a lot of people didn't respond to it the way they typically respond to Wes Anderson. There are people that feel like he may be getting a bit stale, or he's not quite reaching the magic that he once had. Or they're just kind of having it was okay reaction, or it was good, but it wasn't, the greatness that Anderson's capable of, or whatever. I fell in love with the French Dispatch, and the criticisms that the French Dispatch got were very similar to the criticisms that Asteroid City was getting when it played at Cannes. And that made me very excited, because that was like, so you're saying this is in line pretty closely with the French Dispatch. I'm ready. Like, give it to me. So and what I was saying about the French Dispatch, and I can say here also, is Wes Anderson is one of those rare directors where I was just talking about the Fast and Furious franchise, where I was talking about where the more it leans into itself, the worse it's actually getting. But now I've been saying, with like the French Dispatch and now this, it feels like the more Wes Anderson leans into his Wes Anderson-ness and his trademarks and all the stuff he's known for and stuff like that, he's just getting more entertaining. Like, my favorite movie of his is still The Grand Budapest Hotel, with the Royal Tenenbaums probably behind that, but he's still, like I said, I feel like he's really going in deep on what it is that he's known for and just really blowing it up even more. And I feel like it's actually working for him, which feels really risky for somebody like him because his style is already so distinct. His style has been distinctive since the beginning. And to just keep going into it more and leaning more into himself is just really working for me. So most of this I was very happy with. And even starting with the idea, one of the problems I heard that some people had was the fact that it seemed to set itself up as like, a quirky movie set in a quirky town and stuff like that. But there's the setup where it's a play being put on, and so it's talking about like, the writer played by Edward Norton and the director who's Adrian Brody, and then everybody else is like the actors in it. And we're doing this sort of, the black and white footage is like sort of behind the scenes stuff, and then everything we're seeing in the movie in color is the show being put on. And like there's this very satisfying comment at the beginning by Bryan Cranston where it's like it's just kind of in one long string of words talks about the grueling process of writing, and it's like stuff like that is going to resonate with me. So I was into this pretty much instantly. But as it goes on and we get into this colorful world and we do see the Wes Anderson stuff really coming out, the way the camera moves, the way we're introduced to the town, the way we're introduced to all the different characters, the massive, massive, massive cast list, and how everybody does get. That's the way Wes Anderson works. Also, is you would think he's getting in over his head with how massive these casts are getting and these big names, and how you think some of them are going to go to waste. But there's like every actor in here, even if the part is really small, they get at least one moment. There's just this perfect Wes Anderson moment that's often hilarious, or at least resonates in some way. And but to talk about his style, how we immediately contrast these opening black and white scenes with how not just colorful but how bright this movie is in a way, and that's the great thing too that Wes Anderson brings more and more is how movies just a lot of movies these days just don't feel bright in the way they do. Like they feel like colors and tones and stuff like that have like really sort of gone down and things look a little gloomier, and it's like people don't really know how to light movies anymore. But it's like then a Wes Anderson movie comes along, or even we'll talk about Barbie tomorrow actually, and we'll get back into this. But yeah, everything being so bright and lively, even when the characters are like very downtrodden. Some of the characters are actually quite solemn and even going through grieving, but just the camera work and the sets still make everything feel so lively and energetic just by existing. Just by being looked at by an audience, like everything surrounding these characters is alive, and it's great. There's even like roadrunners that come in and out that just have perfect timing also. And we get these moments where like I said, we get the introduction of town and the way the camera moves, and then there's stuff like when Jason Schwartzman's talking to Tom Hanks on the phone, and he's waiting for Hanks to come to the phone, and then the screen is split, and then in the split screen from previous movie, Jason Schwartzman's perspective, the camera does like a full 360, and it's like not only is it looking around at the town, but there's this running gag of a high speed pursuit with the cops happening, and they're shooting at each other. Keeps going by in the background, and the first time we get a look at this, the camera does like a full 360 within a split screen back to Jason Schwartzman. And then Tom Hanks appears, and then they have a conversation, and then there's this great moment where the cameras turn, and even though it's split screen, they're like facing each other. They're like at eye level while they're having this conversation. This very serious conversation about Schwartzman's wife who has died, who was Tom Hanks' daughter. And this is stuff where it's like, not only does it just feel like it's keeping the movie alive, and it doesn't feel like it's just doing it as a technique or just doing it for the sake of it. There's something so visually pleasing about it. Like seeing a split screen where two characters in two completely different places are having a conversation, but they're at eye level. Whereas, like, it never feels like Anderson's doing... I feel like this is why it works, him leaning into himself, where it never feels like Anderson is doing Anderson just for the sake of it, just because he knows that's what his fans want, or because that's... You would think, like, maybe it's the only style he knows or something. It's like, every single shot in a Wes Anderson movie feels so precise. It feels like he's doing that the way he's doing it because he has to. There's no other way possible to do these scenes than the way that we see them. How they're all very meticulously planned and for a reason, for one way or another. Most of the time, that reason's probably just going to be comedy, which really works also. If there's one thing I feel like... Because people talk about like the production design and the dialogue and stuff like that in Wes Anderson movies and just their general quirky feel. I still feel like one thing that goes under-acknowledged about Wes Anderson movies is how fucking funny they are. They're hilarious. And the way he's able to do that, not just in dialogue or just in character interactions or their reactions or whatever, but just the way he can move the camera from like one scene to another or one frame to another can just be really funny in the moment. The timing and like the editing and stuff like that too. Like just everything is so... It's like this orchestra of quirky hilarity going through his movies at all times. And they're just non-stop about it too. All of that is just really impressive. And talking about the way it introduces the characters, introduces the town, where we get basically this tour of the town once things have been introduced, and we see, the big cast list and what part they're going to play and what kind of character they're playing. And we get the tour of the motel area and all that. And there's this energy and this snappiness to it. But like I said, and always an underlying comedy element to it. Whether it be something a character does or a character says, or running gags or something that Anderson's really starting to perfect. He's always been great at, but like I said, I just feel like he's getting stronger the more he goes in particular aspects, even if like, the movies themselves aren't necessarily like, like the last few weren't better than Grand Budapest, but like his technique and the way he's using his style feel like he's just really becoming in tune with himself more and more, and that's just really satisfying. Um, and the way that also I like how this contrasts with us getting a tour of the motel area, and that's how we're introduced to the characters in this very sort of broad way. And we're also introduced to the actors who are playing these characters in the black and white portions, and that one's much more of just like, cutting to them and just sort of introducing them in this very sort of, I would say, unceremonious way. Unceremonious for a Wes Anderson movie. For if it was in any other movie, it'd be like, wow, the editing in that introduction was really lively. But here it feels very intentionally mundane compared to what's going on in the story itself, the story within the story, which is what most of the movie is. Um, and to the point that these scenes are so lively, you almost immediately forget that it's a story in a story. Like, as soon as it cuts from the drab black and white to the color of Asteroid City, it's like and there's even a moment where they kind of play with that, where like Cranston is like this on-screen narrator, and there's the point where he's in like all the black and white portions, but there's one moment where he's in one of the color portions because he like missed he came on his cue too early, and so it's so stuff like that coming in and out is great. And like I said, the way the color contrasts with the black and white is just it makes it sort of pop off the screen even more, which is fantastic. And talking about like the dialogue and how that can often be not just snappy and energetic, but so incredibly funny. It's going to be in the delivery also, because I'm very curious how long Asteroid City's script is, because this is a movie that would be like an hour longer than it is if the actors just said their dialogue at a normal speed. But everybody in this movie is like speed talking, but the speed talking, just like I said, just adds to how funny the lines are and how every delivery is so perfect. And how that I feel like that's another reason where it's always fun to see people come into Wes Anderson movies that haven't worked with him yet. But you can also tell why Wes Anderson has created this group, this ever expanding group of people that he works with frequently, because it's like the dialogue just has this very specific way about it, where you have to say it in like this very, very quick way, but the delivery has to be so almost deadpan, but at the same time like it's like uproariously funny. And it's like he's so specific about that. It's like it makes sense that actors who have had experience and practice with Wes Anderson dialogue are the ones that keep coming back and getting like him and sort of leaning into himself and getting more and more in tune with himself. You can see the actors, the more they work with Anderson, the more they get sort of ingrained in this world and can do this seemingly much more effortlessly as it goes. And there's even stuff like child performances are always really great in Wes Anderson movies, where we have the praying kid that's kind of a running joke throughout the movie. His delivery is always spot on. There's also the delivery on top of the way scenes move. Like, there's a great scene where Jeffrey Wright gives a speech, and Jeffrey Wright, obviously, who was just so great in The French Dispatch, now he's giving a speech in chapters, and every time he concludes a chapter, he moves to a different part of the stage, and they kind of set it up in a different way for him. And I want to say this is all in one shot. If it's not, it feels like it, of him just moving around the stage. Like I said, the delivery is just as hilarious as it is impressive. And like I said, the way the characters have to speak so quickly. And like I said, take what's probably 4 hours of dialogue and make a movie that's like an hour 45. It's fun to behold. And then even times when actors aren't even saying lines. Like, there's a moment where they're waiting for Jeffrey Wright to come into the room, and everybody's just sitting there. And the only person doing anything at all is Fisher Stevens, and he's whistling. And it's like, just even those things stand out. Where even if it's hypothetically, if Fisher Stevens didn't have any lines in this movie, he would still have a standout moment just when he was the only one in the room doing anything and it was whistling. And it's like I said, the way he can make actors shine in that way with just the smallest things and the smallest details is especially rich throughout this movie. And talking about him being in tune with his actors, there is a point in time where Jason Schwartzman's oldest son comes into his son, comes into Scarlett Johansson's train compartment, and he has to read these notes that are written to her from Adrian Brody. And he's reading them, and it's like, even though we haven't even met Adrian Brody's character by this point, we just know of him. But when this character reads notes from Adrian Brody, just hearing the words, you can imagine these are lines Adrian Brody would say in a Wes Anderson movie. And he doesn't even get to say them. And it's like, that's how in tune he is with his returning cast and the characters that he decides to pair them up with. And that's just fantastic. And the Brody scenes themselves are good too, where he gets like these one-take shots where he's like behind the stage and all that, and you see the setup and the like what his career used to be and what it is now. There's this gag where he's pantomiming hitting a speed bag, and the speed bag is right next to him, and it's and it's there's a lot of stuff in this movie that's kind of hard to describe. You just have to see it. That's in line with the alien stuff also, where like this whole alien scene takes place, and that's another aspect of Wes Anderson movies that always stand out is the score. And in this one in particular, like it's a good, score that you would typically find in a Wes Anderson score. That makes it sound like I'm saying they're repetitive, but it's just like you get it. But in this particular scene with the alien, it sort of totally changes the vibe and how like there's something very funny and very odd and very unexpected about this alien scene, but the score makes it almost a beautiful scene at the same time. It's very funny and odd and unexpected. And that's, as I said, there's just so many different things working together in Wes Anderson movies that all come together in this beautiful way and make these really unexpected moments. And talking about his cast and returning cast and stuff like that, I guess it does feel like there's a little bit of a hole in this movie, or like something's missing from this movie because Bill Murray's not in it. To my understanding, I think he got COVID, and that's what kept him from doing it. And I think it was Steve Carell that took his place, who plays the hotel manager. I heard a lot of people before the movie came out speculating it was going to be Hanks' part, because Hanks does feel like he's kind of playing his part in a bit of a Murray way, and how it's definitely a part you can see Murray playing, but there's actually several parts in this movie I could imagine Murray would have played. Like the Hanks character, the Liev Schreiber character, who is hilarious and Liev Schreiber plays perfectly, I could also kind of see being a Murray character. What's interesting about that, though, is it kind of is a testament to Anderson's writing that when I say I feel like I could imagine Murray and Liev Schreiber's part, it would be Murray playing it exactly the way Liev Schreiber played it. Which is real. Like I said, I feel like that's a testament to Anderson's writing and how really specific it is with the characters also. Where it's like the actors are really bringing it to life in these great and funny ways, but really shows how much it starts and ends with what Anderson is writing and his writing style and how he does it, which is great. There's also a funny appearance from Matt Dillon that I wanted to highlight because I feel like Matt Dillon is so capable in comedies. Like we've seen it in There's Something About Mary, and I remember there was an episode where he hosted Saturday Night Live where he was really good and really funny. So it's like I feel like he doesn't get to play comedy enough. So to see him play a part like this that's quite funny was really nice to see also. There's one moment in here that I actually found kind of confusing, where you talk about Anderson kind of being his own thing so clearly. With the alien theme in this movie, I found it interesting that the song from Mars Attacks that kills the aliens is used in this movie, And I can't imagine that being a direct reference, because I feel like Anderson doesn't really do that kind of thing, because he's so his own thing. And it'd be the most random reference. So I don't know if that's just a coincidence that that song is in this movie, because it's such a... It's not gonna be a song you hear every day. I feel like I can only identify it by Mars Attacks and now this. And they both just happen to have aliens in them. So I don't know if that was intentional or not. I can't imagine it was, or what reason it would be. So that's just something that kind of distracted me for a second, but it's nothing wrong with the movie or anything. Um, so now that I have praised this movie as much as I have, to where it probably sounds like it's flawless at this point if you're believing me, but it does. It's a little complicated because by the time it gets to the end, it does go off the rails, but the show within the movie is also going off the rails, so it feels like it might be appropriate. But I also just feel like this movie doesn't completely sustain its time to me. Like, I do feel like it starts to wear out in a way that I didn't get worn out by, like, Grand Budapest or The French Dispatch or his earlier movies or anything like that. There is a point that we get to this movie when we're kind of nearing that, Act 3, where it is starting to wear off a little bit. The energy is starting to wear down a little bit. And we bring in more of the outside factor of the actors within the show. Maybe that's what's doing it. I'm not sure. Because a lot of those scenes are great, too. There's a really great scene between Norton and Schwartzman that's in the black and white portions. But I don't know if it's that or what, but it's... And there's one particular scene that I really hate to say this, especially when I'm talking about Wes Anderson, but I don't... Just know I'm not one of those people that just throws this term around, and I'm not using it lightly. There is one scene towards the end that felt a little pretentious, and I feel like that's kind of where I kind of started to check out a little bit, but... So it didn't sustain itself like, Grand Budapest does. If anything, it kind of did the reverse of The French Dispatch, because the first time I saw The French Dispatch, when it was like the Owen Wilson bit, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it. And then I started to fall in love with the movie kind of in the middle of the Benicio del Toro segment. And then it just got better from there. And this one's like kind of the reverse, where like I'm in love with this movie for a long time, and then just as it's getting towards the end, it kind of starts to lose me a little bit, which is a huge bummer. But for a long time, this movie has a lot going for it, and like I said, still shows how much I'm still loving Wes Anderson as he goes. And I don't feel like he's losing his touch at all. Like I said, if anything, I feel like he's, getting better in certain aspects. But, yeah, we've been down that path. So that's basically how I feel about Asteroid City. So, I guess we can end on Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, which is called Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, because I guess they didn't want to... I was wondering if this was actually the case, and I guess it actually is. They did not want it to be confused with Rennie Harlin's 2006 movie, which was, like, witchcraft, but with dudes. And what's interesting about that is, I guess, when they changed it to The Covenant, it was originally called The Interpreter, which is actually a more appropriate... They do the whole thing where they define Covenant in this context at the end, and it does make a lot of sense. But The Interpreter is also a title that makes a lot of sense. Only trouble is, and I didn't see this mentioned, even if they didn't want to change it to The Covenant, The Interpreter is also a Sidney Pollack movie from 2005 with Nicole Kidman and Sean Penn. So either way, the title of this movie was doomed to be repeated, or to be a repeat. But that's not really any reflection of the movie itself. But to go into it, it definitely has a really strong story. I remember it being an interesting addition to Ritchie's filmography, because Ritchie's been going back and forth for a little bit now, where it's like, he'll do something like really big budget and for the money, like Aladdin. But then he'll do Aladdin, and he'll come back with, like, being back in top form with, like, The Gentleman and Wrath of Man, which is, like, him going back to Lock, Stock, and Snatch. Like, he never missed a beat. When you look at, like, Lock, Stock, and Snatch, and then you can even throw stuff like Rock and Roll in there and stuff like that. And then when you see, the Gentleman Wrath of Man, it's like it was like no time has passed, and it's fantastic. Um, but then this didn't really fall in line with anything that Ritchie has done before. It felt like this really random sort of choice, and so going into it with that and kind of taking that out of the equation, because it's like when you go into a Guy Ritchie movie, you're going to expect certain things, but I feel like the tone was set pretty early in the movie's marketing that this isn't going to be like the snappy sort of Guy Ritchie movie, and like, British criminals doing awesome things and talking in dialogue you can barely decipher, and it's all the better for it, in like a really good and cool way, to where it's like everything is its own, and Ritchie like has his own world he's basically built, and this is completely somewhere else. A lot of it is, seems to be pretty grounded. There is what I actually liked about this movie for a while when it started that may receive criticism is it almost kind of has an episodic nature at the start. You think it's going to have an episodic nature at the start, where it's kind of just them going from task to task, and they have to do this certain thing or that certain thing or whatever. And we can see not just them, working in tandem with each other and just seeing what they do and getting into these tense situations and these building up to these suspenseful scenes and just kind of going from moment to moment like that. But also, Ahmed, this new interpreter, and seeing him be this sort of unexpected character where it's like he seems like, he's going to be an outcast for obvious reasons, but then the way he like uses things to his advantage and his background and all of that playing a part into the decisions he makes and how he works, and then how his relationship and how it's gonna build or not build, with who he's working with, and if there's gonna be animosity here or tension or whatever. And honestly, I could have watched a whole movie of that, of them just going from task to task and having to use their new interpreter, and then having inner turmoil between them. And then at about maybe the 45-minute mark, I started to get Lone Survivor vibes, and then it kind of becomes another movie. And what's interesting, and I guess I'll stop here for a second and say that if you haven't seen this movie yet, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what can be considered spoiler territory, because this movie feels like a few different movies as it goes along. So, and there's different points to kind of discuss in those, so I don't know how far in people know if they haven't seen the movie. So, with that in mind, it does feel like it kind of becomes another movie now, where Gyllenhaal becomes pretty seriously injured, and Ahmed basically has to care for him and, take him on this journey back to wherever safety might be. And obviously they're going to be in this enemy terrain, and the thing about it is Gyllenhaal is concealed in these rugs, and he can't really move a lot because he's injured. And so they're going to be constantly running into people, and he's going to have to hide him, and there's like tense scene after tense scene, and it really plays with suspense really well. And this goes on for some time, and then there is a 4-week time jump after Gyllenhaal is saved, and Ahmed has to go his separate way and basically live in constant jeopardy. And so, again, it becomes seemingly a completely different movie after this 4-week time jump. And now it becomes this idea of it, as far as it taking on a completely different tone, there's a couple of things going on here where it's like it's kind of showing something that's going on in reality, like in our reality. That's this very infuriating thing. And also that's playing a part in the story that's now been set up, where they've been separated and Ahmed is now in jeopardy and Gyllenhaal is here safely at home. And Gyllenhaal now feels like there's a debt that he owes because Ahmed saved his life. Ahmed saved his life many times over. And Gyllenhaal feels that debt to his very core, and is going to try to right this wrong of Ahmed still being over there and not in safety. And so this brings us into this thing that we see where it's like our allies and how they put themselves in such grave danger to help us, and then they ultimately get fucked over, and still just kind of stranded and with their lives in total and complete danger. And so Gyllenhaal trying to right this wrong from home, essentially. And so we get this interesting scene it's a montage of him on the phone trying to get this worked out, and it's a pain that you can feel and a frustration that you can feel through the screen. Where as usual, Gyllenhaal's bringing pretty much everything into this performance, whether it be the physicality of the action scenes or this scene, which almost feels like just as much of an action scene, where it's like all the stuff Gyllenhaal's character has seen and witnessed and had to do when he was like in active duty, and we never really saw him get like big sort of rage induced. What finally brings this character to rage, just full on, almost gets him in trouble rage, is being on the phone with these people. And it's like, that somehow feels so shockingly real. So shockingly believable. Or maybe not so shockingly, actually. Just believable. And so, and then we deal with that, but then when that feels like it's going to be the movie now, and the movie has now shifted to being this in a completely different tone, then for like its third act, it goes back into being a full-on action movie. So I can understand the different beats this movie has as it changes, but it does feel like whiplash. And maybe there's a certain point to that. Like it's intentional that it feels like whiplash of, oh, we're hearing this stuff's going on, and then when we're back at home, it feels like something totally different, and then when he goes back, it's a whole other vibe again. But even so, it still didn't feel like a full-on action movie in the other scenes. It feels like a suspenseful movie, like almost like it's in thriller territory in the first act. So for it to go from like, like suspenseful and a thriller to real life drama and like, guilt and debts being owed, personal debts, and like somebody saved your life, you essentially owe your life to that person, and dealing with that kind of thing. And then it's a full-blown action movie. That's a lot of different tones. So that's something where I'm still kind of trying to register that. I'm very fresh off the movie. So once that sort of falls in and sinks in, I guess I'll see how I feel about it. But right now, it does feel like a lot of whiplash tonally. As far as the vibe in general, and about it not feeling very Ritchie, there are moments where it kind of, and I'm not saying it like has to feel like a Ritchie movie. Like it's interesting to see him break out and to do other things. That he might have, where he may not have the passion that he has for movies that are set in like Ritchie world, like Lock, Stock, and Snatch and The Gentleman and Wrath of Man and stuff like that. But it's not something where he might feel a bit emotionally detached, like something like Aladdin or something like that. Where it's just like, just so he has enough money to make movies like this, is why he does movies like Aladdin. Where there's something else, like there's a middle ground where it's him kind of trying something a bit new and a different territory. And but the way you can kind of see him maybe sneak in a little bit sometimes, like there's dialogue between Gyllenhaal and Johnny Lee Miller or Alexander Ludwig or something, and you can kind of see like when they're like sort of trading barbs, you can kind of see a little bit of Ritchie sneaking into the dialogue. Or there's a moment where he has with Anthony Starr, and he's talking. They're making a deal, and Gyllenhaal says something like, so I'm paying you so that I can wash the car, or something like that. And it's like where, with a little more profanity, that could have been something like right out of, one of the Ritchie world movies, I guess we can call it. So, and it's not very flashy, despite, in the first half, it's not very flashy, despite how much is going on. Like every now and then we'll get like a certain camera angle or a nice shot. There's a really nice overhead shot that shows like how long this journey was for them when Ahmed is like, pulling Gyllenhaal along, or pushing Gyllenhaal along. And it goes from like, it's a daytime scene and they're like in the desert and it's an overhead shot. And then it just immediately, with them like still in the same place, there's a transition where it just turns to night and they're like surrounded by fire in a completely different location. that's really well done, but also shows like the passage of time and how long this has gone on, and all like how rough the terrain and areas are that they're going through, and it's yeah. So it does that well, but then there is this middle portion where Gyllenhaal is home and he's kind of remembering all this, and it does suddenly get very flashy and edit heavy, and then it's just never like that again. Even in the when it turns into a full blown action movie, it just kind of feels like a typical action scenes that aren't. It's good that they're not overly flashy or overly edited either, but it does make this middle portion a little weird when it's like nowhere to be found in the other contexts. So yeah, but still, like I said, it is interesting to see Ritchie doing something different and telling a story that does have a lot of emotional resonance in it. Like even if there is a lot of tonal whiplash, it's very clear at the end of the day what the core of the story is, and it's the two of them, and it's the idea of like what does it take to like literally owe somebody your life, and what are you willing to do to repay that debt, and the bond that it can create with people too, unlikely people at that. And so there's definitely a very good movie in here, but it like I said, it feels a little all over the place to really hit as hard as it probably could, but it's certainly not. It's very far away from bad, that's for sure. So that's what I can say about that. So I think we can end this one here. Like I said, tomorrow we're going to talk about a couple more releases from this year, and then we'll get into all of our September and October stuff, which hopefully is going to be fun. So until that, I think that's it.